this story moves you, please subscribe to Family Archive, leave a like, drop a comment with your thoughts, and share this video with someone who might need it. Your support helps us keep telling real, human stories. I used to think humiliation had a sound. I pictured laughter, a sudden intake of breath, the clatter of cutlery dropped by a shocked hand. But when humiliation finally found me, it arrived as a hush. The kind of hush that eats every other sound and leaves you alone with the truth, bright as a flare in the dark. It was a Friday night, the kind that smells like perfume and possibility. The restaurant was one of those dimly lit places with bentwood chairs and candles trapped inside foggy glass. The tablecloths were white, the conversation around us was soft, almost theatrical. I'd saved up to bring Lena here. She liked places with confidence. I was still learning how to pretend I had some. Lena had the kind of face that made people upgrade their vocabulary, arresting, luminous, sculptural. She moved through the room like a rumor you wanted to be true. I first met her at a mutual friend's birthday, where she laughed at a joke I made that wasn't very good and told me she liked honest men. I didn't know then that honest would end up meaning simple, and simple would end up meaning beneath her. The waiter poured water. I folded my napkin like I was wrapping a gift I wasn't sure she wanted. Lena was late, but not apologetic. Timing was part of her style. When she finally slid into the chair across from me, the candlelight found the gold flecks in her eyes and the edges of her hair, and for a moment I understood why men wrote bad poems. She asked about my day, and I told her the careful version. The new client at the repair shop, the old woman who cried when I fixed her radio, the way the city smelled like rain even though the sky was clear. "You're sweet," Lena said, smiling. "I like that about you." Then she picked up the menu and began to breeze through it like a traveler entertaining destinations. I watched her glance at the prices and not flinch. I watched her order the most delicate thing and ask it to arrive in the most complicated way. The waiter nodded like he'd been expecting this performance all week. I ordered pasta I couldn't pronounce and hoped it wouldn't remember my uncertainty when it arrived. We tried small talk. I told her about the rebuilt record player in my apartment and the box of vinyl my father left me before he moved across the country with a woman who didn't like my name. Lena told me about brand launches, casting lists, and the week she'd spent in a villa where the pool looked like it had been carved out of a dream. When I mentioned that I spent most nights helping my mother patch the leaky roof of our small house after work, something flickered across Lena's face, a brief shadow like a cloud refusing to apologize for passing in front of the sun. "You're so grounded," she said finally. "It's refreshing." I wanted to say, grounded is what people call you when they're glad you're not a balloon they have to chase. Instead, I smiled and asked how her week had been. She told me a story about a gala where a man in a tux recognized her from a campaign and asked for a photo. When she reached the part where the champagne ran out, she laughed like tragedy had visited but decided to dress formally. I noticed it first when the wine arrived. The sommelier poured a taste for Lena, who swirled it with a little flourish and nodded. He turned to me and she placed a hand over the rim of my glass, a gentle arrest. "He's fine," she said. "Just top off mine." I waited for her to laugh, to tell the man she was joking, but she didn't. The sommelier obeyed. My cheeks warmed. I told myself it was the candle. "It's not a big deal," Lena said, placing her hand on mine. Her voice was syrup sweet, the kind that slides over a bruise and calls it cured. "You prefer beer anyway." "I don't. I like wine. I like the way it makes my father's old records sound like they're telling secrets." But I nodded because I have always been professionally polite. Dinner arrived, dressed like a sculpture. We ate, and she told me about a trip she wanted to take to Santorini where the doors are painted the color of expensive sky. I told her about the bridge my mother and I were fixing one plank at a time in our yard where the soil refuses to make peace with the rain. Lena's smile turned thin. "Have you thought," she said lightly, "about moving into the city? Away from all that?" "All that?" I asked. She gestured vaguely toward the version of me she carried in her head. "The repairs. The roof. The situation." "The situation is my mother," I said, not unkindly. "She's a person. She needs me right now." We all need someone, Lena replied, stirring her pasta, eyes on the spoon, her bracelets ticking softly like an expensive clock. It's just, sometimes you have to choose who you're becoming over who you've been. Is that what you're doing? I asked. She met my eyes, and for the first time that evening, her gaze didn't smile. I'm trying. We ate in an easy silence for a while, the restaurant humming around us. Behind Lena, a couple argued in whispers. Behind me, a family celebrated a birthday, the cake waiting like a small polite miracle on a side table. The room felt staged and warm and briefly safe, like we were all extras in each other's happiness. When dessert came, Lena declined. Too much sugar makes me puffy, she said, patting her stomach like a dancer refusing an encore. I ordered coffee. She watched me drink it like I was failing a test nobody had asked me to study for. And then, with a practiced sigh, she leaned back and said, I need to tell you something. There are sentences that carry a flashlight into the future so you can see everything that's about to break. That was one of them. I set my cup down with ceremony as if putting away a weapon. "'Kay," I said. "I like you," she began, and I almost laughed because I could hear the edge of the butt walking toward us in heels. "You're kind. You're careful. You're good. But I've been thinking about us, about my image, about where I'm heading, and..." There was a hush in the room, like a polite audience settling into the second act. "And I'm ashamed to date someone like you." The words didn't land. They detonated. For a moment, I swear the flame in the candle lifted, as if wanting a better view of the wreckage. Somewhere behind me, a fork grazed a plate with a painful, honest note. A server paused mid-step, pivoted, kept going. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Her eyes glinted with the relief of someone who has finally returned a difficult item without a receipt and been thanked for their patience. "I don't mean ashamed of you," she hurried on, wires crossing, voice low enough that only the nearby tables heard, and yet somehow the whole restaurant did. "You're great. You're just not what I can be seen with. Not long-term. Not publicly." There it was, the sound I had misidentified my whole life. Not laughter. Not clatter. Silence, enormous and surgical. The room seemed to lean in. Someone turned the page of a menu. Someone cleared a throat. The birthday cake kept its counsel. "What?" I said eventually, careful with the word. "Does someone like me mean?" She took a breath, then another, a swimmer steeling herself for cold water. "A mechanic," she said. "A helper. A quiet man from a quiet house with a leaky roof and a mother who needs him in shoes that aren't." She glanced at my shoes, polished hard by my hands. "Aren't ready for the rooms I'm walking into." I looked at my shoes like they belonged to a stranger who had asked me for directions. I thought of my hands, scarred, oil-stained, the kind of hands that have learned most secrets make more sense when you take something apart and put it back together again. "I'm not ashamed of you," she said again, as if repetition might alchemize cruelty into clarity. "I'm ashamed of what being with you says about me." I nodded, because what else do you do when the truth is both simple and catastrophic? I lifted my water, took a sip I didn't need, and realized my hand wasn't shaking. There was mercy in that. It meant some part of me had been waiting for this, for the moment when the mask would slide, and I could stop trying to be a person she would never admit to knowing in daylight. "You could have told me sooner," I said. "I know," she said. "But then I'd have missed this." She gestured around us, the restaurant, the candle, the performance of a life where I briefly looked like I belonged. And I wanted to want you. I really did. The manager approached then, a man with shoulders that apologized even when his mouth didn't. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, the way pilots ask if anyone has questions about turbulence they can't control. "All good," I said, and I meant it in the strangest way. Because in the space where humiliation should have taken root, something else was growing, something stubborn and tender and oddly free. Lena reached for her purse. "I'll cover the check," she said. "It's the least I can do." "It isn't," I replied and put my card down first. "But it's not about least. It's about done." She blinked. The word didn't fit her version of me. She had expected crumble, not closure. She put her hand back in her lap and smoothed her dress as if ironing out a future without me, calcifying it into something wearable. When the receipt came, I signed my name like it mattered, because it did. I folded the paper and left a tip that said the evening had been real, even if its conclusion felt like fiction. We stood. The chairs whispered against the floor as if conspiring. At the door, Lena hesitated. "You'll find someone," she said, which is the consolation the more powerful offer the less powerful when they want to exit the scene looking benevolent. "Someone who fits." "I will," I said, not because I knew it, but because I knew she needed me to agree. "And you'll find someone proud to be seen with you." I paused, then added, "I hope you're proud to be seen with you." Her eyes flashed. For a moment, she looked like a girl I might have loved differently if she had let me. Then she turned and stepped into the night, absorbed instantly by the city that had always been her favorite mirror. I stood for a while in the doorway, letting the cool air fold itself around me. I could have walked home. I could have called a friend. I could have called my mother and told her, and she would have said, "Anyone who is ashamed of your work is ashamed of tomorrow, and tomorrow has a way of remembering." Instead, I walked 2 blocks to the river. The water moved with purpose, unconcerned with names and shoes and rooms. On the bridge, a bus rattled past, full of strangers defending their quiet lives with grocery bags and jokes that were only funny because they were told sincerely. I leaned on the railing and watched the moon undress itself in the current, and somewhere between one ripple and the next, I realized I wasn't humiliated. I was relieved. I wouldn't have to perform anymore. I wouldn't have to wear a suit tailored from someone else's longing. The next morning, I went to the shop early. The radio on the counter was still fixed, still old, still beloved. I turned it on, and a song my father used to hum crept into the room like a memory that had decided to be kind. Customers came and went. I replaced a belt, rebuilt a carburetor, told a little boy he could press the horn if he promised not to be scared by his own power. He wasn't. He laughed like permission. At lunch, I called my mother and told her everything. She listened without interrupting, the way she does when she knows you'll tell the truth if given enough room to hear yourself say it. When I finished, she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since the day I introduced Lena. "Baby," she said, "some people want a partner. Some people want an accessory. You can't be both." "I think she wanted a ladder," I said. "And you are not a rung," my mother replied. I went home that night and pulled my father's records from their box. I put on the one with the blue cover he said belonged to the summer he was happiest. I cooked eggs and burned the toast and laughed at myself until I stopped. Then I sat down with a notebook and wrote a list titled Things I Don't Need Permission to Love. Grew fast, mornings coffee, the way good tools feel heavy, old radios that still work, roofs that stop leaking because you decided they would, mothers who tell the truth, and shoes that are ready for any room if the person wearing them is. Weeks later, I went to a different restaurant, the kind with bright lights and a menu printed on paper that smells like the kitchen. I didn't go on a date. I went alone. The server asked if I was waiting for someone, and I said, "Yes, me," and then laughed because I sounded like a fortune cookie that pays rent on time. I ate a bowl of soup so good I wanted to write it a letter. Couple at the next table argued kindly about whose turn it was to wash the car. I read a book. No one cared who I was seen with, least of all me. I ran into Lena once, months later, outside a gallery opening where the wine came in shallow glasses and the conversation was all elevation and angles. She looked incredible, in the way that fashion can sometimes look like a temporary personality. The man beside her had shoes that could hold a reflection. She saw me and did the thing where a person decides quickly what version of themselves you're allowed to meet. She gave me a smile that said, "We're friends with time now, aren't we?" And I returned one that said, "We're strangers with history, and that's enough." "How are you?" she asked. "Good," I said. "Busy. Happy." "You look it," she replied, sounding surprised, like I'd violated a rule she'd written in invisible ink. "Take care, Lena," I said. "Be proud." Her eyes flickered. Then she nodded and turned back to a conversation that would look amazing on a feed. I stepped into the street, where a bus sighed like it had finally gotten everything off its chest. I walked home, past windows with kitchens spilling laughter and living rooms holding arguments that would end in forgiveness. I passed a small restaurant with soft light, where a man reached across a table and took a woman's hand as if it was a hard-earned prize and not a prop. When I reached my block, the neighbor's kid was on the stoop with a broken skateboard. We fixed it together with a spare bolt from my pocket, and when it held, he grinned like gravity had agreed to be reasonable. "Thanks," he said. I was embarrassed to ask. I told him the truth I'd learned in a quiet, expensive room. Ask anyway. The worst that happens is silence. The best that happens is help. That night, I wrote another list, this one titled Rooms I Belong In. I started with mine. I added my mother's kitchen, the shop on 7th where the light hits the counter like approval, the bridge over the river at exactly 9 p.m., the bench outside the library that always has space for one more person who needs to finish a page before they go inside. I didn't write her restaurants. I didn't need to. There are 1,000 places to eat when you are hungry, and only a few places to be when you are yourself. I chose those. And if you're listening because you've been told you're not for someone else's camera, hear me. There is no accessory made of you that won't eventually break. Be the tool. Be the hand that knows what it can fix. Be the person who signs their own name and means it. The night at the restaurant didn't end with applause or outrage. It ended with quiet, and in that quiet I found not shame but scale. I fit my life again. Fit me back. Ending CTA. If you connected with this story, please subscribe to Family Archive, like this video, leave a comment telling us your thoughts, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your engagement truly helps this channel grow and keeps these stories coming. Thank you for being here. Weeks later, a storm rolled in from the west and tested the roof my mother and I had repaired. We stood together in the yellow light of the kitchen, listening. No drips. No frantic pots arranged like a percussion section to catch the failures. We laughed the small, relieved laugh of people who chose to trust nails and patience. I told her about the list I had written, and she added a few items without asking permission. The porch at sunrise, the smell of lumber, the way a dog decides you are good and refuses to reconsider. I started taking evening classes too, not because a certificate would make me more worthy in a dining room, but because curiosity is a currency that spends well everywhere. The first class was on electrical systems. The second was storytelling of all things. Teacher with messy hair and a steady voice said, "Shame is a narrator who always wants the last word. Don't give it the microphone." I wrote that down and underlined it hard enough to press through the page. The shop, a woman named Eva began bringing her car in for routine things she insisted were disasters. She'd pace and apologize for existing and then laugh at herself. One day, while I rotated her tires, she asked what I did when I wasn't saving strangers from the tyranny of dashboard lights. I told her about the river, the records, the lists. She told me about the garden she kept on a windowsill because a yard was a dream for another year. When she left, she handed me a paper cup with 2 basil seedlings and said, "Try these. They like people who pay attention." The basil lived. Grew leggy and green and smelled like dinner waiting to happen. I learned to pinch it back and give it more sun and to stop being surprised by resilience. Plants forgive a lot if you listen early and often. People do too sometimes. One Saturday, I fixed a jukebox for a diner that had been pretending to be a museum for a decade. When the owner flipped the switch and the lights came alive like a carnival deciding to stay, the teenagers in the corner cheered as if a new world had opened. A little girl danced between the tables like gravity had loosened its rules. I watched them and thought, rooms I belong in. On the bus home, a couple argued about being seen. The woman wanted to post a picture, the man didn't like his hair. I smiled at the ordinary intimacy of it. There are arguments that bloom from fear and arguments that fertilize trust. You can tell the difference by whether anyone reaches for the other person's hand when the light changes. She did. He squeezed. The moment passed like a cloud refusing to make a scene of itself. I started writing again. Nothing fancy, just pages about small victories. Bolts that came loose without swearing, customers who said thank you like it was a gift they were grateful to be able to give, nights when I slept without replaying any scenes. Sometimes I wrote about Lena without writing her name. I wrote about how beauty that requires an audience is a performance, and beauty that survives alone is a practice. I wrote about shoes that walk you into rooms and rooms that meet you halfway. When autumn arrived, the river cooled and sharpened. I stood on the bridge and felt the season change like a decision. I didn't miss her. I missed who I had tried to be for her, the smooth, edited version of myself who only came with captions. I let him go too. Eva visited the shop and asked if I wanted to see a movie that nobody else seemed excited about. We went on a Tuesday. The theater was mostly empty, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world is letting you rehearse being happy. Afterward, we walked through the half-lit streets and told the truth carefully, like we were handling glass that had already been cracked and didn't need help breaking. She told me her last boyfriend wanted her to speak softly in restaurants so people would think he was the interesting one. I told her about a candle and a sentence and the way a room can go silent and set you free. We began to meet for coffee, then for walks, then for the kind of dinners where the server doesn't hover because your conversation makes the table look anchored. When she laughed, I didn't feel like I was passing a test. When she saw my hands, she asked what each scar meant and listened like the stories were architecture she might someday move into. She didn't need to be proud to be seen with me. She was just proud to see me. One evening, rain started mid-meal and the roof over the patio clicked and sang. I looked up, expecting a drip and a rush for cover that never came. Eva squeezed my hand and said, "You look like a man who trusts ceilings." I told her I finally do. If you're still here, if some part of this echoes, remember, rooms are built by the people inside them. You deserve to build yours with someone who brings a hammer, not a measuring tape for your worth. Postscript. Months from that night, I returned to the first restaurant by accident, walking a friend to a cab. Through the glass, I saw new faces and the same candles, little galaxies trapped in jars. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. I stood for a breath, thanked the room for telling the truth, and kept walking toward the life that answers back when I call it by my name.